This is Travis Wayne Goodsell, and as you are aware, if you've known any of my work on this YouTube channel, on my website, or publications, that I was born and raised Mormon, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Brighamite branch. Mormons don't catch on to that. They understand it, but it's foreign to them. They don't quite understand why I would say the Brighamite branch, because Mormons believe Brigham Young was the legitimate successor chosen by God and blah blah blah, even though it's been well over 150 years separated from the event. And so as you know, if you've been looking at my channels, you've seen that Mormons don't like me. They don't like one of their own. They think I've betrayed them. And so they put a thumbs down on my videos. And because they think I'm wrong. That they are right. Even though they haven't studied. They don't know the truth. But that's what they're told to believe, and so they believe that they are justified in cyberbullying. That's what it is when people put thumbs down on my video, or anybody else's video for that matter. That's cyberbullying. And for Mormons to do it to one of their own who is trying to educate and warn, you know, that's just wrong, people. But nevertheless, you'll still see it. I mean, I even had my video on the Egyptian prophecy of the end of the world. Something that should have been harmless. And yet, I've already got 2 last I saw. 2 thumbs down. How can you not? It just blows my mind how hateful people can be. And so, with the succession in the LDS Church, Mormons get very touchy, and it needs to stop. You can't defend church. You defend gospel precepts. That's the focus. And yet the church has turned it so that members of the church protect them. The leaders of the church are hiding behind their members as shields, just like terrorists do in foreign countries. They hide behind women and children, use the women and children as shields. That's what the church is doing with you when you step up and defend the church rather than the gospel principles. So as a child growing up in the LDS Church, I've been through several changes in leadership. Born in 1970, Joseph Fielding Smith Jr. Either just died in January of 70, or he was the one that replaced the previous guy who died in 70. And we had numerous presidents of the church from there on after. And even though it was always the president of the Quorum of the 12 who became the president of the church, I was still taught in Institute at Rick's College that it's God who chooses who the president of the church is, and that he can choose whoever he wants. And so it doesn't have to be the president of the Quorum of the 12, as my instructors were teaching me in the church. And so I'd been believing that. It was regurgitative information. I didn't do the research myself to find out what it is in practice, why it is in practice. and what it's supposed to be, if it's supposed to be something else. So in other words, I didn't fact check what people were telling me in the church. I just believed whatever I was being told. And that's what I'm trying to warn Mormons about. I had the video about being informed versus learning how to learn. And I can't remember the title, but it's got the little boy sitting at a desk with books piled up, and he's going, oh. I saw that picture and thought, yeah, that's got to be the cover photo. And so when I later found out that the church had filed with the state of Utah a sole corporation in 1940, making it so that each and every single time a president of the church dies, it automatically transfers ownership of the corporation of the church to the president of the 12. So 1940 is when it became designated for the president of the 12 each and every single time. And my instructors apparently were unaware of this, and so are members of the church. Although when President Monson died, and President Hinckley died, and Benson and Hunter and Kimball, I was always wondering, well, I wonder who's going to be. And I would, get involved in, I wonder which one. That would be fascinating to know. And then it becomes the president of the 12 each and every single time. And when President Nelson got up and announced an April conference this year for his first time, he said that it was the Lord's choice from Brigham Young. He didn't say Joseph Smith. He said from Brigham Young. And then he went and said Lord's choice, when I had known by that point that it was a court filing for sole corporation status that was the cause. It wasn't God's revelation. And so, yeah, that just inspires people to want to know more. Why did it happen this way? What is it supposed to be? If it is God's church, how does God want it? Because just because a leader says something does not automatically mean it's God wanting it. We're supposed to, as members, verify that the president of the church was truly called of God. But if he's actually assigned in advance, so that means it's not God who actually chose. It's not a matter of the apostles meet in the Holy of Holies and God visits them and says, I want this man to be the head of my church now. It doesn't happen that way. And so when people make laws according to tradition, that's where danger signs begin to pop up. Because the Pharisees, they pulled that stunt. They took the law of Moses and they created hedge laws based upon their traditions, based upon their thinking they were protecting the Jews to keep them as far away as possible from violating the law of Moses. And so they created all these hedge laws. And so when Jesus comes along, the story of Jesus is about a rebel Jew, a Jew who's in defiance of the Pharisaical laws. and he's going against the head of the Jewish church, Caiaphas, and creates a separate religion, a separate economy, and he's just in complete defiance of the Jewish religion. And so what happened when Joseph Smith died? Why is it that you and I were born and raised in the LDS Church through Brigham Young? And so that's what I'm going to go over, is the succession crisis, and then point out from the Doctrine and Covenants what Joseph Smith had received from Revelation as to how the succession of presidents were to be done. And you will see that Brigham Young is illegitimate. And again, you can't attack me, Mormons. I mean, yes, you can, but you aren't godlike if you do it. And so, yeah, I'm expecting to see thumbs down from hater Mormons. But I'm hoping Mormons can be reasonable, and it just doesn't seem to be the case. Mormons keep avoiding this. They don't want to hear the truth. They don't want to realize that they've been duped their whole life. Remember, I was born and raised Mormon. I am not out of the church because of wickedness on my part. And Mormons don't get that. They don't understand it because they've been trained to believe that people who leave the church are wicked. That's why they left. That's why they're kicked out. That's why they're excommunicated. It's because of sin and defiance of God. That, unfortunately, is not the case. Millions of Mormons have already left. So there's a few million Mormons left. So how do I reach you guys? How do I soften the hearts of the hardest of hearts in Mormonism? So we're going for the jugular. We're going to the source of the problem, the succession crisis. Now, I won't go over Joseph Smith's martyrdom and what actually happened in the jail, because the church obviously has to tell a different story. And Willard Richards and John Taylor, who were in there with Joseph Smith and Hiram, gave contradictory witness accounts. And so something weird was going on there. Nevertheless, notwithstanding, I'm not going to go over Brigham Young and his history and what led him to it, or any of the others. We're just going to talk about the succession crisis. So after Joseph Smith died, no leader of the church. And so Mormons were wondering, who takes over the church? And nobody thought they knew. And as a result, there were members of the church who were rising up, claiming that they were supposed to take over the church. And each had their claim to why they should be the one. If you go to the Wikipedia page, they say several people. There were more than several people. There were dozens. It's only several people that had a more legitimate claim than others. And so the ones who are considered the most likely are Sidney Rigdon, Brigham Young, and James Strang. And yeah, you've never heard of James Strang, I imagine. But Sidney Rigdon should be familiar, but you're probably wondering, well, why him? Because you don't do your church history. The church only puts out what they want you to know. They do not let you know any other facts and evidences that would disparage Brigham Young from being the legitimate successor. And so thus the winner, Brigham Young, has no choice but to dismiss all other claims. That's just the way it's done in society and throughout history. So, there were other theoretical successors. Hiram Smith, that he was murdered. Samuel Smith, William Smith, children of Joseph Smith, Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and then they have others that I have to go to the section to read. But let's get to the main one. There's Thomas B. Marsh. That's the leadership crisis that I call it. Back in 1838, 6 years before the succession crisis. And the information that the church reveals to us are about people's journal accounts decades after the actual events. And they're all questionable. We can't rely on them because they are clearly biased by having been of a particular or being a follower of a particular leader. And in most cases it's Brigham Young. There's David Whitmer, who was chased out by the Danites in 1838's leadership crisis, who wrote a little article claiming that Joseph Smith had sex with a 14-year-old housekeeper. And so you got to take it into that consideration. You can't just choose to not believe him because he fell away, or choose to believe him because he says something that damages Joseph Smith's reputation. You can't make judgments based on that. And critics make that mistake as well. And so you have to look at the facts. You have to see the Danites threatened David Whitmer. David Whitmer was forced to leave. David Whitmer assumed Joseph Smith was the head of the Danites. So when he wrote that, you have to take that into consideration. Okay, so theoretical successors, Joseph's family. It was well understood, and that's why Emma Smith did not go to be with Brigham Young here to Utah. Do you Mormons understand that? Emma Smith was the Relief Society president. It's not like the Relief Society of today, who have no leadership authority except over women. Emma Smith was put in place as the woman's leader. And Mormons, they don't get that. And so she had authority to lead the women of the church. And she maintained it. And those who stuck with her were a part of the true church for women. It's a little weird to understand because you assume that the leader of the church, the white old man, is the one who is in control of all of the church. And it wasn't the way it was intended in the beginning. Okay, so Hiram was murdered. He was intended to be the successor if Hiram was not assassinated as well. And so as you can see, Joseph Smith intended to keep presidential succession within the family. It was not intended to have any other administrative organization, or, as I've pointed out, the missionary department under Brigham Young after he chased out Thomas B. Marsh, and then excommunicated him, independent of Joseph Smith. Yeah, this is actually a legitimate claim that the Smith family have to the presidency of the church, but that's now gone, and they never fully utilized it as they ought to have. Then Oliver Cowdery, he was the second elder. And so as second elder, you think, well, okay, maybe he had a legitimate succession. At that time, they had no clue. They were all trying to say, yeah, it's me because I'm the second elder. It's like a counselor. You know, if President Nelson were to die, Elder Oaks could usurp, well, he would automatically become, because he's the official president of the 12. Ballard is the acting president of the 12 while he's in the council. But if that weren't the case, you know, Irene, for example, if Oaks also died, Irene would then be making the claim, I should be the president of the church because I'm the second counselor. That's what Oliver Cowdery's position was. And then David Whitmer, he was the president of the High Council. And so that's the standing High Council. And Mormons don't understand this. Brigham Young was the missionary department president. He was not the Quorum of the 12 president. And Mormons don't get that. So David Whitmer would have had a claim if he hadn't left because of the Danites. And so let's see. And then Sidney Rigdon was in the first presidency, and so that similar to Oliver Cowdery. Brigham Young, see, they have it wrong in the Wikipedia. It said Quorum of the 12 Apostles. No, it was the traveling 12. David Whitmer was of the standing 12. So, yeah, I mean, this is what happens when decades and centuries go by. Little facts and specific details get dropped purposely. And people end up changing the past, changing history in order to fit the current narrative. And Mormons are not catching on to that. They automatically trust and believe whatever the leaders tell them to believe, whatever the manuals tell them to believe. And now Mormons are ordered to not go to any other source other than church-approved materials. I used to be in the curriculum department. I was working on the church-approved materials. So I know very well that you should trust them with a grain of salt. I know the errors in them. So as much as you guys think that things are the way they are, they're not. Okay, so James Strang, he was just an elder, Melchizedek priesthood elder, an elder, and he claimed that he had received a letter from Joseph Smith saying that he was to be appointed as the successor. I'm sure that letter was legitimate. But he doubled down. He also created an ancient document that he alone translated. You got to give him credit for that. So yeah, he actually turned many prominent Mormons to his organization because he was able to fool people into thinking he was a seer, that he had received a letter from Joseph Smith, that he had the ability to translate, because a seer is greater than a prophet, as the Book of Mormon tells us, and that a seer can translate ancient records. And so, yeah, he brought forth the fruit that he is the God's chosen because he can translate ancient documents. And so, yes, that's why I did the video about how presidents of the church from Brigham Young to Nelson have done nothing to demonstrate that they are legitimate seers. Where are the translations of the Egyptian documents? The Book of Mormon was Egyptian. The brass plates were said to be Egyptian. The Book of Abraham comes from Egyptian documents. Why isn't any of the presidents of the church translating the Egyptian documents? It's that simple of an understanding. And that's what James Strang used as his justification. He could do it. Brigham Young can't. Brigham Young never did. And then there's a guy named Granville Hedrick. Apparently he had no ordination on record. He may have been an elder, but let's see. His became branched off into Church of Christ at the Temple Lot, and then also the Church of Christ with the Elijah Message. Not too familiar with this guy, but just so that Mormons understand, there were lots of people claiming to be the successor. And so Brigham Young and Sidney Rigdon were the main ones who had a debate, public debate, where they both presented their case before the members of the church who were there present. And it was in somebody's journal who sided with Brigham Young, who later, decades later, recorded in his journal about this event and said that, oh, it looked like he was speaking as Joseph Smith, and he may have said that Joseph Smith appeared to have possessed his body and made him look like Joseph Smith or talk like him, some nonsense like that. And that, you know, he's trying to utilize propaganda to support his decision that Brigham Young was the right one to follow. That's all it is. And so we have no legitimate reason for Brigham Young over anybody else. James Strang technically would be the better choice. Sidney Rigdon also is a pretty good choice because he wrote the Book of Mormon, or at least the majority of it. The linguistic analysis shows Sidney Rigdon as the author of the Book of Mormon. But he didn't join the church until Joseph Smith began to work on the revision of the Bible. So how did he get involved before becoming a member? Again, you got to do the church history. You've got to research history. And then you find out, oh, the Solomon Spaulding document. That's where Sidney Rigdon comes in. And so, so let's go to Joseph Smith's justification for becoming president of the church. And his justification comes from the Doctrine and Covenants, section 107. 107. All right. And this is talking about the priesthood organizations, both Aaronic and Melchizedek, talking about the offices therein, talking about how there's need to be a high priest group within the Melchizedek priesthood, not just an elders quorum. But, you know, Nelson did away with the high priests. Only leaders now become high priests. All right, so that's the one I need. Okay, here it is. In verse 23, he skips 22, specifically because this would ruin his chances. In verse 23, the 12 traveling counselors. This is where Brigham Young was the president, because he had chased out and excommunicated Thomas B. Marsh. The 12 counselors are called to be the 12 apostles or special witnesses of the name of Christ in all the world. This is not the original quorum of the 12 in authority. That was David Whitmer. The standing 12. And thus differing from other officers in the church. See? It's different from officers in the church. These are missionaries. They are not leaders of the church. So Joseph Smith is here declaring, Peter? No. He wasn't Jesus' successor. It was James, the brother of Jesus. But that's another topic. I'm sure you're freaking out now. What? Catholics are freaking out now. What? So, yeah, the traveling 12 are the missionary department. They do not have office. They're not authoritative in leadership. And yet, Joseph Smith goes on to say in verse 24, they form a quorum, equal in authority and power to the 3 presidents previously mentioned. That sentence, that verse, is what Brigham Young used to justify him to be the successor and to take over the church. And Mormons fell for it. Why? Because they didn't read and fact check him. Because in verse 22 is what's supposed to happen. This is how Joseph Smith established how to restore the church if there is no successor, and or if the president of the church dies, rather. And it says, of the Melchizedek priesthood, 3 presiding high priests. This is not the stake presidency, people. This is the presidency of the church. The presiding high priest. They've even got it capitalized for you so that you understand this is for the gold. You know, this is for all the keys of the church. And it says, of the Melchizedek priesthood, 3 presiding high priests, chosen by the body. Now, body does not mean the physical body. Come on. Body means the body of the Melchizedek priesthood. It's sort of like a pronoun, and or an adjective in this case. But pronouns are adjectives, sort of. And so Melchizedek priesthood, chosen by the Melchizedek priesthood, elders and high priests, chosen. That means there is having to be a vote for the successor to the church. I don't recall when I became an elder in the Melchizedek priesthood ever voting for the successor. I'm sure you guys haven't either, because it hasn't happened. Instead, they've changed it so that when they have April conference, we would have the sustaining vote. See, they've changed this around. we're not supposed to vote in the sense of sustaining. See, because that part is here where it says upheld by the confidence, faith, and prayer of the church. So it's not supposed to be a vote in conference. We're just supposed to sustain them. We acknowledge that the vote is legitimate. We sustain you. But we don't vote. Because in 1940, it now is only to be the president of the 12, who are the standing 12 now. Changed from the traveling 12 to now being the standing 12. And we have a member of the 70 who's over the missionary department. And so, chosen by the body, chosen by the Melchizedek priesthood, appointed and ordained to that office. So the Melchizedek priesthood vote, and then the rest of the church, the Aaronic priesthood, the children, and the women are supposed to support. And it's not a vote for them. It's just support. Yeah, we support. And so the voting never happens in the church. The church has twisted it and merged it into one entity to avoid having this process done in the church. And that's what's supposed to happen. And so, as I had made the video about the lunar eclipses that indicate a death of religious leaders, and I pointed out the tetrad that occurred in 2014-2015 corresponded with the deaths of 3 apostles. However, in 2007, a month before, Elder Faust died, but a month after, President Hinckley died. So President Hinckley died in correspondence with a lunar eclipse, a blood moon. Then Monson, he dies a month before a lunar eclipse. Seeing a pattern here in the last days? 2 prophets in a row die in connection with a lunar eclipse, a blood moon. And there was more with Monson's death. There was another sign on that night. And there was a supermoon the day before, and was still sort of a supermoon on that second night as well, because the new and full moons usually last for about 3.5 nights. Interesting symbolism, isn't it? Especially when you read John's Revelation. 3.5 is a common theme in Numbers. And so then you have my warning video that I did for this January. On January 20th and 21st, overnight, is another total lunar eclipse, a blood moon. And this is the 3rd one in a row. And this one is over the United States, just like the solar eclipse was over the United States. And these are more common than solar eclipses, but like I said, I've identified a pattern of prophets dying with lunar eclipses. And I don't know if this one is going to indicate that Nelson is going to die. You know, just because Hinckley, then Monson have died on lunar eclipses doesn't necessarily mean it'll be Nelson dying on this one. It could mean somebody else could die, very likely, just like Elder Faust died under the other one. And then the tetrad, you know, it was Packer, Perry, and Scott who died during that one. So it may not be. So I'm not suggesting. I'm just telling you this is going to be big. And, you know, it could be simply that maybe it's the collapse of the church. Because we've seen the collapse of our nation. Joseph Smith prophesied the Constitution would hang by a thread, that the federal government would cease to exist. He prophesied that. I've done that video too. And so, you know, we're in the last days. Look at what Trump has done. You know, you got to turn off Fox. Change the channel to some other news channel that's not controlled by Trump. You'll be amazed at how much new information you're getting. Go to PBS. That's safe. They have the BYU channel on that one, don't they? The PBS and BYU together? Or did they do away with the BYU channel on PBS or whatever? But, you know, go to that one. You know, Judy is great. You know, she reads what she's told to read, but it's just news, and it covers all sorts of stuff. And so there's less bias in that. They then, later on in the show, after they cover the news topics, you know, they may have some discussion and interviews with some people who get off tangent from news. But for the most part, Judy's good to at least hear the news. And so, yeah, there's lots of things going on, Mormons. If you're just listening to Fox, you're missing out. You can't just not hear something and it doesn't exist because you don't hear it. You know, there are people dying at the border, kids dying at the border. But Fox, they're not going to cover that. They don't want to expose Trump to being guilty of bloodshed. They don't want to disclose that Trump has violated every constitutional right that we have. You know? So you actually got to step outside the box, people. You actually have to learn the truth. And the truth is going to be hard because you've been conditioned to believe in a certain way. And so if President Nelson dies, I hope you understand President Oaks is not to be the successor. We are to have a vote by the Melchizedek priesthood. You and I, because I'm not excommunicated. I still have a vote. We're supposed to vote for the successor. And I would hope that you wouldn't do it based on your feelings, saying, oh, well, Oaks needs to be it because we need to establish the tradition that has been going on. It's not the way it's done. You're supposed to choose someone who has proven the gospel of Jesus Christ, who has demonstrated the fruits of seership. You know, if James Strang were to be alive today, claiming that, hey, I've translated these ancient documents, you need to fact check them. So, you know, just so that you understand, Mormons, just because things are the way they are doesn't mean that they're right. You can't bully me. It doesn't work to bully me. Because truth is independent of what you believe. You're supposed to conform your beliefs to the truth. And the only way to know the truth is to replicate the truth into physical reality. You can't just have been informed and believe you know the truth. So it's 45 minutes. So there's the succession as it's supposed to be and why we have it the way it is now. Brigham Young was illegitimate. He claimed verse 24 instead of 22 as to how Joseph Smith intended it to be. All right, so there you go. So yeah, technically the 70 in verse 25 and 26, they also are equal in authority to the 12. Therefore, equal in authority to the first presidency. They could, if they all agreed together unanimously, they could overthrow the prophets and establish the true process for succession. 70 could technically do that according to Brigham Young's logic. I would like to see that happen. That would be cool, but it's not likely. So just so Mormons know, there's the way things are and the way things should be. And if you think that God's church is through tradition and that Jesus can't defy tradition, he can't go against it, what God are you worshiping? Because it ain't the God I worship. That's another video I wanted to do, but I don't know if I'll get to it. Is that with all different kinds of beliefs about God, each and every single different belief represents a different God. And I'm going too far on this. This is tangent. So, hope you understand, Mormons. Truth is not what you think it is.